The Ramban tells us that each of the Svarim, each of the Chumashim, has a name and has a theme. Now this is something we've spoken about in the past. You think about it for a second. Why is the Torah divided into 5 books? Is it just a question of convenience? If it was one big book, it would be too heavy to carry around, so we divide it into 5? Or there really is a rationale behind the division? And the Ramban understands each Sefer has a theme. And the entire Sefer revolves around that theme. When the theme is concluded, we proceed to the next theme and the next Sefer. So the Ramban explains what is the theme of Sefer Bereshis and what is the theme of Sefer Shemos. The Ramban says that Sefer Bereshis, the first book, is called the Sefer Yetzirah. It's the book of creation, the book of formation. And it's the book of formation in 2 senses. First of all, it talks about the formation of the world. The Brias HaOlam, the creation of the world. That is the beginning of Sefer Bereshis. But it's also the formation of the Jewish people. It tells us the stories of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov's children. This is the Yetzirah. This is the formation of the nation. And the Ramban elaborates on this theme because we know that there is a principle that Masa Avos Siman Labayim, that which the Avos experienced, foretells and foreshadows later events in Jewish history. And it's more than that. It's not just that it foretells, but actually the lives of the Avos actually fix future events. Because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wishes to manipulate and guide the course of history, he does it this way. First, he brings about a certain pattern in miniature, and then it is replicated on the grander scheme, on the grander scale. So the episodes that occur in the lives of the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, really are the same things that occur later in Jewish history in the lives of the children. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes the later events happen by making the earlier events happen. So therefore, every event which is described in the book of Bereshis is a Yetzirah. It is a process of creation, a process of formation for events that will unfold later in the book of Shemos. So therefore, in that sense, Sefer Bereshis is the book of formation, the book of creation. Sefer Shemos, says the Ramban, is the Sefer HaGeula. It's the book of redemption. That's the overall theme. This is the book of redemption. Now, the Ramban asks a very obvious question, that really it's only the first 3.5 weekly portions that deal with redemption. Shemos, Vayera, Bo, B'Shalach. Once we get to the middle of B'Shalach, the Jews have left Egypt, the Red Sea is split. The Jews are redeemed. So what about the rest of the Sefer? The second half of B'Shalach, Yisro, Mishpatim, Truma, Tzavik, Yisisa, V'Yakov, Perkudei. How do those parshias relate to the theme of Geula, the theme of redemption? So the Ramban tells us an amazing thing. Redemption, Geula, does not mean simply to be liberated from slavery. Geula means restoration. When you are restored to your original spiritual level, that is Geula. So the Ramban says, look back in the book of Bereshis. What was the Madrega? What was the level of the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? So the Ramban writes that the Avos lived, in a sense, with Shechina alei ohaleim. The Shechina rested on their tents. Their tents were a sanctuary, if you will, for the divine presence. Chazal tell us that ha'avais hein ha'merkava. The avos, in a sense, are the divine chariots, so to speak. They are the dwelling place of the Shekhinah. And in theory, that should have been carried forward from generation to generation. But we know that when the Jews went to Egypt, there was a process of decline. There was a process of degeneration. And the Jews lost it. They weren't on the spiritual plateau, the spiritual plane that the Avos had lived on. And that level, that madrega, had to be reclaimed. And it was reclaimed. The Jews, through their experience of the Exodus from Egypt, through their experience of the Red Sea, through their experience of the Maimon Har Sinai, receiving the Torah in Har Sinai, they were restored to the original level of the Avos, and that process of restoration is completed when the Shekhinah rests on their tents, which is the Hashras HaShekhinah in the Mishkan. And that is the conclusion of our Parsha. If you look at the last verses in our Parsha, it talks about how Moshe Rabbeinu assembled the Mishkan, how the Shekhinah came to rest on the Mishkan, and that's the conclusion of the Sefer, and rightfully so. Because if the theme of the Sefer HaGeula is restoration, the Jews being restored to the level of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that process is complete when the Shekhinah comes to rest on the Mishkan. And that's where the Sefer HaGeula, where the book of restoration ends. This is what the Ramban explains. So the Ramban says, Bereshis is the formation. The experiences of the Avos foretell the future, and Sefer Shemos is really the unfolding of those later events in the lives of the children. And the resting of the Shekhinah at the end of Sefer Shemos corresponds to the resting of the Shekhinah on the tents of the Avos. I'd like to point out an interesting thing. I once heard from one of my Rebbeim that the Hebrew word for a year is Shana. Shana is the Hebrew word for a year. Now the word Shana is related to two words that have opposite meanings. To be shoneh, in one sense, means to repeat. In another sense, it means to be different. Something which is shoneh means it's different. On the other hand, it also means something which is repeated. So which is it? Is it a repetition or is it something different? So this Adam Chacham pointed out the following. He said that, there are different metaphors we use for time. Some people look at time as an arrow. It travels in a straight line. It moves on and moves on and moves on and moves on. Some people look at time as a circle. It goes around, around, around. We come back to the same point again and again and again. The Jewish view of time, some people think is a circle, but really it's more accurately described as a spiral. It goes around, but as it goes around, it comes back at a higher level. It comes around again, a higher level, a higher level, a higher level. So at the same time that in one sense it is a repetition, in another sense it is very much different. It's very much elevated. The relationship of Bereshis to Shemos is, as the Ramban says, Bereshis is the formation, it's the foundation for the events that unfold in Shemos. But it may be that the events that unfold in Shemos as well are a foretelling of events that will occur even later in Jewish history. In other words, these events of Shemos are the unfolding of the earlier hints of Bereshis, but they themselves may function as hints for events later in Jewish history. I'd like to share with you an amazing idea that the Gera Rebbe, the Imri Emes, said on this week's Parsha. The Chazal tell us that the Mishkan was assembled on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Really, the Chumash itself says that on the first day of Chodesh Nisan, Moshe Rabbeinu erected the Mishkan. But in fact, that was not the first time he put it up. We know from the book of Vayikra that Rosh Chodesh Nisan was the Yom HaShmini. It was the 8th day of the Miluim, the 8th day of the investiture of the Kehanim. And really, it was preceded by 7 days that were the last 7 days of Adar. The 8th day was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So Chazal say that in those 7 days, the Mishkan also must have been up, because the Torah tells us in great detail the various korbanos that Moshe Rabbeinu, that week Moshe Rabbeinu functioned as a Kohen, the various korbanos he brought in the Mishkan. So the Mishkan must have stood. And yet it says in our Parsha that Moshe erected it on the Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So what's going on? When was it put up? 7 days before, or was it only put up Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So Chazal say that for 7 days, the last 7 days of Adar, every day Moshe Rabbeinu put up the Mishkan, took it down. Put it up, took it down. Put it up, took it down. Until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, on that day he put it up and it remained, which was the 8th day, the Yom HaShmini. So everyone wonders, what is the point? What is the point of putting it up, taking it down, putting it up, taking it down for 7 days? Only on the 8th day did Moshe put it up and leave it up. So the Chedushia, the Ger Rebbe, the Imri Emes, points out an amazing thing. He says that if you review Jewish history, we find that over the course of Jewish history, there were 7 sanctuaries. There were 7 sanctuaries. There was the sanctuary of the Midbar that Moshe Rabbeinu built, that traveled with the Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar. When they came to Eretz Yisrael, the sanctuary was established in a city named Gilgal. It was there for 14 years. Then the Mishkan was moved to the city of Shiloh. It was there for 369 years.
They were using it?
Pardon?
The Mishkan, they were using it? It hadn't built the temple?
And they put it in Shiloh.
Oh, okay.
Then, for a combination of 77 years, it was in the cities of Nov and Givain. So we have 5 places. Then we have the first Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim and the second Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Cool. So we have 7 places. Of course, none of them had permanence. The Mishkan of the Midbar was superseded by the Mishkan of Gilgal. Gilgal was replaced by Shiloh. Shiloh was destroyed. The Mishkan was moved to Nov Giva. Ultimately, the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim was built. That was destroyed. It was replaced by the second Beis HaMikdash. That was destroyed. So we have 7 sanctuaries that were not permanent. Of course, our emunah, our faith is, our belief is, that the final Beis HaMikdash, the third Beis HaMikdash of Yerushalayim, will be the permanent sanctuary. Moshe Rabbeinu putting up the Mishkan and taking it down 7 times foreshadows the 7 sanctuaries that won't be permanent. The Midbar, Gilgal, Shiloh, Nov, Givon, and the first 2 temples in Yerushalayim. Moshe Rabbeinu putting up the Mishkan on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, on the Yom HaShmini, on the 8th day, that foreshadows the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the third Beis HaMikdash, which we hope will come even Meher of Yameinu, which of course, once it is put up, it will remain, just like this Mishkan that Moshe Rabbeinu put it up, and it wasn't taken down, but rather it was allowed to remain. So therefore, these stories of Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, they are the unfolding of the hints in the lives of the Avos, but they also are Rumazim, they're also hints for future events in Jewish history as well. Question?
Did any of these previous, when the Beis HaMikdash was built to the Mishkan, was there an impression that it would be the permanent place?
No. No, it was understood. Let's put it this way, I shouldn't say that. In other words, when Yerushalayim was built, there might have been the sense that it would have been permanent, but it turned out not to be so.
Right.
And that's what these activities of Moshe Rabbeinu will do to. So it's a fantastic idea.
The number 5 Mishkan, when they were going to build the first permanent one in Jerusalem, what did they do with the Mishkan, like the actual one that Moses did?
That's a good question. Chazal say that the components of the Mishkan, the parts of the Mishkan, were not destroyed. They were hidden. They were concealed. They were buried. Raiders of the Lost Ark, kind of, but not quite. But that's the idea behind it. They were nignaz. They were hidden. And the Chazal basis on the pasuk, it says about the kroshim, about the boards of the Mishkan. It says there were atzei shitim oimdim. They were standing shitim wood. So Chazal say oimdim la'ad ol me'olamim. They stood forever, meaning they never were destroyed like Yerushalayim was destroyed, but they were superseded and they were buried. So Imri Emes goes a step further, the Ger Rebbe, and he says this is alluded to in a very famous pasuk. The pasuk says that ki yipol tzadik sheva v'kam, that the righteous person falls 7 times and he picks himself up dusts himself off, and starts over again.
This is Mishlei?
Pardon?
This is from Mishlei?
Yeah. In other words, that's the nature of a tzaddik. There's no such thing as a tzaddik who goes through life. Everything is always uphill every day. There are always setbacks in life. The tzaddik falls 7 times, and he gets up. And of course, the Perush of this pasuk from the Baal Shem Tov is well known. Maybe it's not well known in our circles, but the Balatanya already writes that the Perush of the Baal Shem on this pasuk is well known, which is that it's not that sometimes it happens, but it must be this way, and to the contrary, that is the way that a tzaddik rises. A tzaddik achieves his madrega specifically through the setbacks, through overcoming the setbacks. And I think that many business writers will tell you this, that every successful person builds his success on the foundation of a magnificent failure. There's no person who is so charmed that he lives his life starting out with success and it just snowballs into greater and greater and greater success. Everybody that has made something of his life has had miserable failures. But you learn your lessons from those failures and you rise above them, and that's how you become truly successful. And that's the idea that the tzaddik falls 7 times. It's not that sometimes it happens, or even if it happens, nevertheless he picks himself up. But to the contrary, the tzaddik dafka succeeds because of his failures. And the Amos understands as well that the ultimate Beis HaMikdash, really becomes what it is meant to be, built on the foundation of the failures of the past. The 7 sanctuaries which did not have permanence and had their setbacks. From the experience, we grow, we learn, and ultimately that leads us to the building of the final, ultimate Beis HaMikdash, which is everlasting. I want to point out that the idea of tshuva, the idea of repentance, is really built in to the very fabric of the Mishkan. As we know from Rashi in this week's PARSHA, it says in the beginning of the PARSHA that Eile Perkudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEidus. This is the counting of the Mishkan of testimony. So the question is, why is the Mishkan called the Mishkan of testimony? What does it testify to? So Rashi says that the Mishkan testifies to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu pardoned the Chet HaEgel. The Jews were guilty of a terrible sin. They made the golden calf. They worshipped the golden calf. And had this sin not been forgiven, God would not have allowed them to build the Mishkan. The fact that God allowed them to build the Mishkan shows that God forgave the sin. So it's the Mishkan HaEidus. It's the Mishkan which testifies to God's forgiveness of the Chet HaEgel. I want to point out a very interesting thing. The Torah tells us that Moshe made an accounting. He gave a din v'cheshbon. He gave an accounting of the precious metals, the gold, the silver, and the copper. The Midrashim seem to say that the purpose of this accounting is because even the greatest people are suspected of embezzling or maybe skimming money off the top, etc. But the truth is that there must be something else over here, because the Torah does not record enough information for us to see that Moshe did not embezzle. You see, if you wanted to give a financial statement, you have to have both an accounting of the income and the expenses. In other words, if you just know the income, well, you don't know. Was all of it spent on the expenses? Was only some of it spent and the rest was embezzled? So obviously you have to have an accounting both of the income and the expenses. When it comes to the Mishkan, we find it's a very odd tabulation. When it comes to the gold, the Torah tells us exactly how much gold was taken in, but tells us nothing about how the gold was used, what it was used for, and how much was used. It just talks about the income. The expenses are not mentioned at all with regards to the gold. With regards to the silver, the Torah interestingly gives a very precise cheshbon, both of income and expenses. The silver was not contributed voluntarily. The silver was a special donation of half shkolim, which were for the Mishkan. Now, every year there was an annual collection of shkolim for the purchase of the sacrifices, but there was a one-time collection of shkolim for the Mishkan, and this was used for the adonim. This was used for the sockets, which formed the bases of the crushing of the vertical boards. But there was a little extra also, because there were 100 adonim, and if you make a calculation, which Rashi does, you need 600,000 half shkolim, which is 300,000 shkolim, to make the 100 kikar, which is the amount needed for those sockets. And Rashi gives an exact cheshbon. So the shkolim of 600,000 people would have satisfied that requirement. The problem is that there were more than 600,000 people. There were 603,550. So you have 3,550 people, which is 1,725. 75?
25. 1,000. You said 3,000.
3,550.
50, so 1,275. 1,725.
Okay, I'll trust you. Okay, so there's a little extra. So the Torah accounts for that too, and it says that that extra silver was used to decorate the pillars of the courtyard and to make the silver hooks that held up the curtains. So here we have a very exact accounting of what came in and what was used. When it comes to the copper, it's kind of so-so. We have a precise accounting of the copper that came in. The Torah does tell us what it was used for, but not the amounts that were used. So it's a very haphazard type of tabulation. What is the cheshbon? So it seems to me like this, that it may be that the original purpose of the accounting was that Moshe should not be suspected. But the Torah did not record this information for that purpose. It would have been enough to say that Moshe gave an accounting, and we would assume that it all worked out. He followed customary
generally accepted
accounting procedures, and that would be all right. We don't need to know to the last dollar or the last ounce what the gold was used for, the silver, the copper. There's something else over here. It is as follows, that the Torah wants to record information about these metals which demonstrate the fact that it's Mishkan Ha'edus, that it testifies to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave the Chet HaEgel. And there are several things that the Torah wants to point out. Number one is the generosity of the Jewish people, which is a tikkun, which is a rectification for the Chet HaEgel. One aspect of the Chet HaEgel was their willingness to donate for that cause. Because when Aaron told them bring gold, they brought gold, and they made it into an egel. So Chazal tell us that the tikkun, the tshuva, the repair of that sin, was that now they should give gold for the Mishkan. This is a kapara. This is a tikkun for having given gold for the egel. So it's very important to record that they gave a tremendous amount of gold. And again, my assumption is that the amount of gold they contributed for the Mishkan was more than the amount of gold they contributed for the egel.
Yeah.
So that rectifies the chet. It's not a question of what Moshe used it for. That's not the issue at all, as we'll see. The question is, they gave it. So there's an exact accounting of what they gave. What Moshe used it for, that may have been necessary if Moshe was suspected, but for our purposes, we don't need to know that every little scrap was used for the Mishkan. We don't suspect Moshe Rabbeinu on that, but we need to know that, in fact, it was a very, very colossal gift, and that's the tikkun of the Chet HaEgel. We need to know furthermore something else, that everyone participated. And that's a very odd thing, because really the Mishkan was a function of generosity. No one was commanded to give. It was me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libo. So how do we know that everybody participated? Because there was one aspect of the Mishkan in which everyone did participate. which was the donation of the silver. Because in addition to the voluntary donations, there was the compulsory gift of 1/2 shekel. And perhaps we could assume that the reason for that was to guarantee that everyone would have a share. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want anyone slipping between the cracks. Everyone had to participate. Because it had to be an eidos, it had to be a testimony that every last Jew was forgiven. There was no grudge, no grievance against any Jew. So here the Torah tells us not only the amount of silver, but exactly that all of it was used. Because all of this silver had to find its place into the Mishkan to guarantee that every person had a share. That it's the Mishkan Ha'edos for every last Jew.
Is there a Bronx participants?
No, they didn't. So therefore the Torah tells us exactly, of the 603,550, exactly what it went to. That 600,000 half shkolim went to the Adonim, and the remaining 3,550 half shkolim went to the decoration of the pillars. But it's very, very, very important that this be mentioned. The third idea is this, that there was a certain pride that the Bnei Yisrael had, that they could point to the Mishkan and say, oh, you see, that's what we did, that's what we contributed. You know, there was a very famous Jewish philanthropist who I won't identify, and he became very interested in religious causes, and donated a lot of money for yeshivas and all sorts of things, and he insisted that his name be put on every building he donated.
Okay.
And a lot of people think that this is kind of pompous, that he has to have his name plastered all over the world. He donated so many buildings, so many yeshivas, so many shuls, so many that. But he told someone that the reason he did that was because his children, and he feared his grandchildren, right, would not be interested naturally in these causes, and therefore he wanted his descendants to know what was important to him. And therefore he wanted that his name be on all these yeshivas and all these Torah institutions, so that his children, who weren't necessarily inclined to follow in his footsteps, would know this was something that was important to him, to the grandfather, and they should perpetuate that. But it wasn't because he needed to have his name up in lights. It was sent a very powerful message. And as well, the Bnei Yisrael, it was a source of immense pride to be able to point to the Mishkan and say, look, you see that? That came from our nidavos. That's what our philanthropy produced. But it's a very interesting thing about the Mishkan, that all the gold in the Mishkan was concealed. This is something which is not immediately apparent. But if you study the PARSHA of the Mishkan carefully, you'll discover all the things that were made of gold were in the inner building of the Mishkan. The menorah, the aron, the shulchan, the mizbeach hazahav. The boards were covered with gold, and all of that was covered with the curtains. So none of the gold was exposed. And just to illustrate this point, it's something which is like astounding, that bear with me for a moment, that the outer curtains of the Mishkan, the Yerios Ho'izim, made of goat's hair, were 30 amos long. And if you make an exact calculation of how the 30 amos were draped, you discover that they did not go all the way down to the ground. They hung on both sides of the Mishkan, and they left one amma, 1 cubit, exposed. They didn't go all the way down to the ground. They left one amma exposed, and that amma, of course, was the adonim that were made of silver. So it almost seems deliberately so that the kavana was to cover the gold, but since the bottom amma was made of silver, that could be exposed. And everybody that involves himself in a Mishkan building project wonders. It's almost like, your pants are too short, like, they don't. You can see your socks. This doesn't seem becoming. If the curtains were meant to cover the whole thing, why don't they go all the way down to the ground? The answer is because the silver was meant to be exposed. People were meant to see the silver. The gold was meant to be covered. So therefore, that last amma, which was silver, was uncovered. Everything that was gold was covered. Now, the reason, of course, is very simple. Chazal tell us that chotei bal yisnoeh. If a person sins with something, they shouldn't adorn themselves with that thing. They shouldn't beautify themselves with the thing they used for sin. So since the gold was the material they used for the Egel Hazov, the gold had to be covered up. So nobody visiting the Mishkan could ever point to something gold and say, oh, you see that? That's what we contributed. That's what we gave. Because all the gold was covered up. So there's no point in identifying what the gold was used for. So it mentions the fact they donated gold. That, of course, was a tikkun. They gave gold for the Egel, so they made that up by giving gold for the Mishkan. But that was never visible. So there's no point in identifying what the gold was for. If the whole purpose of identifying what the materials were used for is that people should be able to point and say, this is what we contributed, the things that were gold were concealed anyway. But the things of silver and copper, which were exposed, those things were identified. But this is the idea, that the whole idea of the Mishkan is to be an eidos, a testimony. And the idea of testimony is that it gives us a sense of pride and a sense of good feeling that, yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted us back. So tshuva is built into the Mishkan itself. The Mishkan itself is a testimony to the power of tshuva, the power of repentance, and the power of forgiveness. But it's interesting that not only is the Mishkan that way, the Beis HaMikdash later in history also was that way. It's an amazing, amazing thing. That the Gemara tells a story in Masechah Shabbos that we know there was a great sin that David HaMelech committed, which was the sin of Bathsheba. That he took this woman and he arranged that the husband should be sent into battle and so on and so forth. And this was a terrible chet. The prophet Nasan Hanavi very harshly rebuked him, and David HaMelech engaged in Shuvah. He repented his sin. And it's an amazing thing that David HaMelech, we don't hold him in esteem because we see him as the Tzaddik Gomer. We hold him in esteem because we see him as the quintessence of the Baal Shuvah. And the idea of Shuvah is a theme that runs through many of the Tehillim, where David HaMelech prays for forgiveness and for guidance and so on and so forth. So there's a Gemara which says like this, that David HaMelech asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu that make a sign, a public sign that I was forgiven. It's an embarrassment. I'm embarrassed. Because everyone looks at me and they say, oh, look at him, what a sinner he is. Make a sign that I was forgiven. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, B'chayecha ein yoseh. In your lifetime, I'm not going to do it. But b'chaye bincha, in your son's lifetime, I'll make a public sign. I'll make a public sign that I accept your tshuva and that your sin is forgiven. Okay, so when did this happen? So the Gemara tells the story that when Shlomo HaMelech came to dedicate the Beis HaMikdash, and he wanted to bring the Aron into the Holy of Holies, Dov Kusharim Zebozeh. So the gates stuck together. The gates wouldn't open. And Shlomo HaMelech prayed 24 prayers. They didn't open. And finally he said, Zachra Chasdei David. He prayed to God to remember the kindnesses of David. And then the gates opened in the merit of David. That's Ba'avur David Avdecha al Tashay Pnei Mashiachecha. In the merit of David, your servant, don't turn away your anointed one, meaning his son Shlomo. And sure enough, that was the sign, the fact that the gates only opened in the merit of David, that was the sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave the sin of Bathsheba. But it's interesting that it's built into the Beis HaMikdash. That's where the sign was given. The sign was given in the Beis HaMikdash, because that is the whole idea of the Beis HaMikdash. The whole idea of the Beis HaMikdash is the idea of tshuva. It's the idea that we can strive to be better, to improve, to elevate ourselves. And therefore that is built into the Mishkan, built into the Beis HaMikdash. I just want to share with you something very important to know about the idea of tshuva. There's a pasuk we say in the Haftarah of Shabbos Shuvah. The Navi tells us, "Kechui machem dvarim," take words, v'shuvu al Hashem, and return to God. Imru elav, say unto him, Kol tisa avayin, forgive all sin, v'kach toiv, and accept our good deeds. That's the prayer. The prayer of the Baal Tshuva is tisa, kol tisa avayin, forgive all our sins, v'kach toiv, and accept our good deeds. So Rabbi Eliezer in the Shai Tshuva is bothered by a very serious question. Why do you have to pray that God should accept our good deeds? To pray that He should accept our tshuva, that I understand. Forgiveness is not an entitlement. Even if you do tshuva, it's only a function of midas harachim, it's a function of divine mercy that God forgives. So you have to pray for that. But what do you have to pray? V'kach toiv, accept our good deeds. I mean, if you do a good deed, then of course God should accept it. What's the chidush? So Rabbi Eliezer says an amazing thing. He brings a Gemara. The Gemara says that aveira mechaba mitzvah, that a sin extinguishes the luster of a mitzvah. When a person is in a state of sin, his mitzvahs are diminished, his mitzvahs are dimmed. In other words, it's not like there are two separate accounts. There's a sin account and a mitzvah account. And, you can fill the sin account and you can fill the mitzvah account too. It's not that way. When a person is in a state of sin, even his mitzvahs lose their luster. So I want to give a mashal. So imagine a person buys a new car, magnificent car, a Mercedes, a Lexus, beautiful car, and someone comes with a key and scratches the paint in the car. So it's not that the car is just as beautiful, but it has a scratch. The scratch diminishes the luster of the car. It's not as beautiful as it's meant to be. The human being in the state of sin is not as shining as he should be when he does his mitzvahs. The mitzvahs don't add the luster, the polish to his being that they should when he's in a state of sin. Okay, so a person does tshuva. So one might have thought, okay, tshuva will bring forgiveness of the sin. But it can't retroactively restore the luster of the mitzvahs. Says Rabbi Eliezer, that's what we pray for. Kol tisa avin, forgive all sin, v'kach toiv, accept our good deeds, means the good deeds that we performed when we were in a state of sin, accept them as if we never had sinned. Allow them to be as shining and as lustrous as they would have been had we done them in a state of purity and innocence. And Rabbi Eliezer says, and that in fact is the case, that when a person does tshuva, it rectifies all the faults retroactively to the extent that the person is as beautiful and as shining as he would have been had he never committed the sin. That's an amazing thing. Because, our tendency is when a person asks forgiveness of us, we say, listen, I forgive you, I don't want to see you for the rest of my life. Just go away. I'm fed up. I don't want to see you. I'm interested. So, okay, that's how we are. That's who we are. In other words, I don't hold it against you. I'm not going to sue you. I'm not taking you to court. No, I'm not going to take revenge. But I'm not interested in you're being my best friend. That's not how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. When we do tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, He welcomes us back as if we never sinned. We are as lustrous, as gleaming as we would have been had we never sinned. That's the idea of kol tisa avin v'kach toiv, that we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to retroactively accept our good deeds as if we had never sinned, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says yes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu consents to that. That is the power of tshuva, and therefore the Beis Hamikdash that would have been built, the Mishkan that would have been built by tzaddikim gemurim, by the absolutely righteous, that is the Mishkan that is built by these people who had done terrible aveiros. The Bnei Yisrael, who were guilty of the Chet HaEgel, David and Malach, who was guilty of the Chet HaBasheva. That Beis Hamikdash is not diminished because of the aveiros that they did, but to the contrary, through their tshuva, they are restored to their original luster, And Baruch Hashem, this is the Beis Hamikdash which results. The Beis Hamikdash, which is as gleaming and as holy and as pure as would have been. Then I want to share with you one last idea that in the Parsha, it tells us that the Jews brought the various components of the Mishkan to Moshe Rabbeinu, but as we said, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who assembled it. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who put it together. And the question is asked, why did it have to be that way? Why did it have to be that the various parts the Bnei Yisrael made, but the assembly could only be made by Moshe Rabbeinu? And there are many interpretations. Last night in a different class we spoke about some possibilities. I'd like to share with you an idea that Mefarshim say. When Moshe Rabbeinu was given the instructions of the Mishkan, he was told that build the Mishkan in accordance with the image that you saw on the mountain. Because Moshe Rabbeinu had a vision of the Mishkan on Har Sinai, and Hashem told him, make the Mishkan accordingly. He says, what is that Mishkan, that vision of the Mishkan on Har Sinai? So we read the pasuk, we think it was a blueprint. Because the Baruch had a blueprint. Maybe it was on a screen, and this is what it looks like. And a picture says more than 1,000 words. So Moshe Rabbeinu had that picture, and he knew exactly what it was meant to be. The truth is, Chazal tell us an amazing thing. Chazal tell us about the Beis Hamikdash, but undoubtedly it's about the Mishkan too, that there is a Beis Hamikdash in heaven. There is a Beis Hamikdash in heaven. And the Beis Hamikdash in heaven corresponds to the Beis Hamikdash below. Chazal say this on a pasuk. It says, Yerushalayim habenuya, the rebuilt Yerushalayim, ki ir shel chubur lo yachdav, is like a city which is reunited. So, of course, we who are familiar with recent history assume that the pasuk is a reference to East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, the old city, the new city. The city is reunited. That's Yerushalayim HaBenuya. It's reunited. But Chazal understand it differently. Chazal understand that the Ir Shel Chubur Lo Yachdav, the city which is reunited, means the heavenly Yerushalayim and the earthly Yerushalayim. There's a heavenly Beis Hamikdash. And our Beis Hamikdash on earth corresponds to that heavenly Beis Hamikdash. Undoubtedly, the case is true with the Mishkan as well. That there is an earthly Mishkan, there's a heavenly Mishkan, and there's a correspondence. So when it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was told, build the Mishkan on earth, as you saw on the mountain, it wasn't a blueprint that he saw or a picture on a screen that he saw. Because Moshe Rabbeinu saw the Mishkan in heaven. He saw that heavenly Mishkan. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, build the Mishkan on earth in a manner that corresponds. Meaning that the Mishkan is not just a work of art, but there's a correspondence between the Mishkan and ideas that are fundamentally spiritual, fundamentally heavenly. And therefore, no one else can do it. Because beyond a certain point, the preliminaries, the manufacture of the parts, that can be done by other people. But only the person who has had that experience of being on the mountain and seeing the Mishkan in heaven, only that person can assemble the Mishkan. And that's why it had to be Moshe Rabbeinu. Only Moshe Rabbeinu could put it together. Because only Moshe Rabbeinu could invest it with the sanctity that it has. From this Dvar Torah, which is said by many great people, and many Dvar Torah which are similar, you see a tremendous thing that in Jewish thought, it's not just the material substance of a thing. The kavanah, the understanding, the intent, is a factor in the physical object. The expression which is used in the Sifrei Chasidus is kayach payel benifal. You have the strength of the active agent in the object he acts upon. Because if I make something, it isn't just that this is a physical object, but there is something of my kavana, something of my intention, something of my fervor, something of my passion, which is invested in the object. And therefore, there could have been many people that could have replicated the physical Mishkan. I'm sure that Betzalel could have done it. Ahaliav could have done it. These were great craftsmen. Maybe in some ways they were even greater than Moshe Rabbeinu in terms of crafts. I wonder, by the way, I know it sounds funny, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu stuttered. He was a kvad peh. So the question is, we should attribute a fault to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Maharal says, no, this wasn't a fault. This attests to the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. It says his spirit, his neshama was so great, his body couldn't keep up with it. Whereas you have to have a body that can handle its soul, right? But if your soul is so lofty, so your body just doesn't, can't keep up with it. Therefore, that's why there was a stutter, because there was so much to say. The tongue couldn't speak fast enough, so it stuttered. So I wondered that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't a great craftsman. Maybe he did not have the physical kalim, physical tools, to be able to translate his understanding and his vision into a physical object. Maybe that's why it had to be. There was a Betzalel and there was an Ahaliav. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was too great. Maybe he wasn't able to do it. I don't know. That's a conjecture. But once the parts were manufactured, it was just a question of assembly, there was something that only Moshe Rabbeinu could invest, because there was a level of understanding that only Moshe Rabbeinu had, because only he was on the mountain, only he saw the Mishkan in heaven. So he had to assemble it in order to invest the Mishkan with that quality.
Did he physically did it himself, or could have some help?
No, it says he did it. He assembled it. He put it together. He put the parts together.
But how did
he didn't fabricate the parts, but he assembled the parts. How did he do it?
Yeah. I mean, the curtains are 30 hours long.
That's what it says. He did it. Now the Medrash says that God helped him, but the point is, but it was necessary for Moshe to have that input. I think we have to know this. We have to know this with regards to mitzvahs that we do. Because very often we assume that you have to do a mitzvah. It involves an object. Maybe it's an object that we manufacture or that someone manufactures. So we're very concerned for the outward appearances of it. The matzah should be nicely baked, well done, and so on and so forth. The tefillin should be nice and black, beautiful, square. It's also important, the kavana, the kavana that goes into it is very important. The kavana that is invested in the manufacture of a mitzvah object totally transforms the nature of the object. It's a different thing when it's written by a person who has yiras shamayim, who has fear of heaven, who does it with passion and with fervor, than a person does without those kavanas. Right? And this is true not only for the manufacture of objects, but for any action that we do. In other words, our emotion and our feeling is a factor in the physical act that we perform. And that, I think, is a lesson we learn from this parsha, that Moshe Rabbeinu, only Moshe Rabbeinu, because of what he knew and what he understood and what he felt, was able to invest the Mishkan with this quality that it needed to have. So it's an amazing parsha, and it's an amazing conclusion. I think most of us, when it comes to Parshas Vayakov Perkudei, our eyes glaze over, because we've had Mishkan for the last month, just Mishkan. But the truth is that really, when it comes to the end of Parshas Perkudei, we should all feel such a sense of pride, such a sense of accomplishment, vicarious, of course. We weren't there, but sharing in the joy and in the sense of accomplishment that our forefathers had just on this day, when the Shekhinah came to rest on the works of their hands. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And with a little imagination, I think we can do it. But it is something that we have to appreciate. I think all these themes come together. The idea of tshuva being built in, the idea that people who really should have been rejected because of the Chet HaEgel are welcomed back in a way which is as if they never had sinned, that they're able to bring the Shekhinah on the works of their hands, but only, again, with that additional element that Moshe Rabbeinu alone can invest, that correspondence, that the Mishkan we build on earth really corresponds to the Mishkan in heaven. These are ideas which are wonderfully inspiring. And hopefully we'll learn the PARSHA, read the PARSHA, and we'll take these things to heart. Yes?
Is the heavenly Mishkan one day is going to be here on earth? Is something written about that?
You know, the Gemara says, yeah, I shouldn't say the Gemara says it. Rashi says it in several places, that the Bayis Shlishi, the third base of Mikdash, will come down from heaven. That's what it says. Rashi says in Masech Sukkah, Masech Shana, that the third base of Mikdash will come from heaven. The Rambam doesn't seem to say that. The Rambam seems to understand that the third base of Mikdash will be man-made. But Rashi does say this. Right?
Well, maybe because the one in heaven...
And the idea seems to be exactly this. The idea that coming down from heaven means that the third base of Mikdash will be the heavenly base of Mikdash. It's not that there'll be another base of Mikdash that comes from heaven. Instead of there being a base of Mikdash on earth and a base of Mikdash in heaven, the third base of Mikdash simply will be the heavenly base of Mikdash coming down to earth.
Yeah, because even if they build one now, aren't they really... They're just rebuilding the second one. So basically, if they, it's like...
well, it's not quite.
The second one, it's not different.
It's not the same as the second one. This is another interesting thing. The third base of Mikdash is described in the book of Yecheskel.
Yeah, it's different.
It's very different than the first base of Mikdash, which is described in Malachim. The second base of Mikdash, the Rambam says, was a composite of both, because the Nevuah of Cheskel already was written, so it was made a blend of the first base of Mikdash and the prophecies describing the third base of Mikdash, which implies that it's, in a sense, like a bridge. It bridges between the first and the third, and therefore it has aspects of both. The third base of Mikdash is totally different.
So what they're talking about now about rebuilding, what do they have in mind? Yecheskel's...
Who's they?
Well, you always hear...
Humans us.
I don't know. I don't know.
You always hear talk, but you don't know, what are they talking? Are they rebuilding?
I don't know. This is a question that it's there is a lot of discussion as to the practical aspects. Can the various halachic impediments be overcome to attempt to build a base of Mikdash? I have my doubts about the enterprise. I think there are a lot of questions that are still unresolved. But the people that are talking about it are obviously going with the opinion that it is meant to be a man-made structure, like the Rambam says. And therefore they figure that why not get to work, why not start?